Hey, welcome back to Everyday Economics. The podcast helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, CEO of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network, and you can subscribe to all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make a tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Friday, August 9th. And joining me, as always, my friend and colleague, PhD economist, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. Dr. O, we're taping this on Friday, and I think, one of the bigger buzzes around, the world of economics is this conversation spurred by something that Republican candidate for President Donald Trump said with regard to wanting to have a say in economic policy as it pertains to the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve's decisions. And boy, I'll tell you, people are running all over the place with this. I guess sort of the question is, and for the benefit of our audience, I mean, it's just like as a starting point. I think for some that the Federal Reserve is something of a black box. We're not really sure, or Wizard of Oz, however you'd like to characterize that. They telegraph a lot of the decisions that they're ultimately going to make, through the meetings that they have and the statements that the deputies make. But in terms of like the decision making that occurs inside, it's almost for some like picking a pope. They go in and smoke goes up, and rates are up, or the Fed rates up, the Fed rates down. We have had stasis now, I think, for 8 months. We have not had a change in the Federal Reserve rate. We thought going into this year, you and I thought that we would see some cuts, not nearly as ambitious as some people had suggested. Some people were saying there could be as many as 6 rate cuts this year, which we thought was laughable at the beginning. We've had 0 so far. Signal is that there could be a rate cut coming in September. But we won't know until September. How much? Here's the question. Could you talk about the Federal Reserve and the role of the Federal Reserve, and then talk about basically whether or not it should be influenced by any elected official?
Well, yeah. I mean, let me say that again. No, it should not be influenced by any elected officials. So first of all, the members of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System are nominated by the President of the United States and confirmed by Senate. So, can you imagine if you were on the job and your boss asked you to do something and it was the wrong thing to do? Would you listen to your boss anyway, or would you just ignore him? Right?
Is that rhetorical? I hope so. I'm sure that there are things that I ask my folks to do that they don't do, whether they're the right thing or the wrong thing.
But I think it's the point. I mean,
part of operating any business.
I
guess it just depends on the on whether the guy in charge is,
you're appointed by
making suggestions or making demands.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, the truth is, suggestions or demands, you would probably take it as, oh, he's putting pressure on me to do something. And it's the wrong thing to do. And if I don't do it, maybe I'm out of a job. And I think that's how most people would react. But anyway, just to give you an example, and I'm going to take this straight out of the Wall Street Journal that covered the story today. Mm-hmm. Fed officials have been able to guard their ability to set interest rates without political interference since the 1970s. When high inflation was blamed in part by President Nixon's success in persuading the Fed chairman, a former economic advisor to President Nixon, to keep rates low before the 1972 election.
Mm-hmm.
Does this sound a little familiar? Does it look familiar? Do we have a candidate who is basically saying, hey, look, we can't do this, we can't do that? I mean,
in this case, it would be the opposite. I mean,
I think Trump don't raise interest rates. It would be don't raise interest rates because. No.
Well, don't lower interest rates because, right? I mean, I think is sort of where candidate Trump is, right?
Yeah. Don't lower interest rate. Exactly. I mean, exactly. Don't lower interest rate because and look, the reality is the Fed does not care who's president. The Fed has this very clear mandate. It's all about financial stability. It's about keeping inflation low and stable and keeping Americans employed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very difficult thing to accomplish, right? The Fed brought inflation down from 9% in measured by the CPI, 9% in June 22 to just 3% in June of this year, of 2024.
Yeah.
Massive accomplishment. Oh, by the way, while Americans continue to work, permanent layoffs remain low, the employment rate of prime working age Americans is the highest it's been in 23 years. I think they're doing a pretty damn good job.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's all I got to say. Second of all,
you are kind of a Federal Reserve. Not to say that you're a fan, but I mean at the very least, I think you've been complimentary of how they've steered us through.
I think
the last
I think they did a terrible job recognizing that inflation was picking up at the very beginning of this whole thing.
And we talked about that, but in the times they were a little slow on the uptake.
Oh, absolutely.
But you've been largely complimentary
But they corrected their mistakes. It's that's what we teach our kids, right? When you fail, you learn from failure and you fix it. And the Fed did exactly that. They fixed their mistake, and now we have inflation coming down, which is supportive of a more sustainable economic growth forward.
Mm-hmm.
We have, and by the way, I'm hopeful that they'll make the right decision in September, because we're starting to see the U.S. economy cooling, at least the labor market, hiring rates have come down. And so all of these people coming into the labor force are sitting unemployed a little bit longer. And so I hope they make the right decision. But I think one more point about this whole thing: credibility and confidence. The market needs to be able to say, to know that the Fed is able to act independently, right? Without the credibility that the Fed has, it would cause absolute market mayhem. You want to talk about sell-offs, market sell-offs. You want to talk about losing your pension. Well, guess what? Get a president involved, right,
mm-hmm.
in making monetary policy, and no one is going to believe anything that comes out of the Fed, because politicians are influenced by the election cycles. I want to get reelected. So let me just tweak things a little bit in my favor, right? We don't want that, right? We want market stability. Also, price stability important. Let me give you a good example, and let's just take the current administration, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine the current administration wanted to continue to promote their. Remember, interest costs on the U.S. debt have soared.
Yes.
Right? They've soared along with higher interest rates, right?
We spent a lot of money. We spent a lot of money, and we paid a lot of money to spend that money.
Exactly. Now imagine if the Fed had not been independent, and we were to say, ultimately we want to keep spending, and so we just want to keep interest costs lower. So why not just have the Fed reduce interest rates,
right,
at a time where it should be raising interest rates? What do you think happens in that scenario? Well, if we cut interest rates at a time where we should be raising them, well, inflation soars.
Yeah, didn't Britain try to do that?
I mean, there was a little fiasco with the shortest ever prime minister in England, right?
Right.
I mean, same thing. So kind of similar to what happened in the 1970s, right? Oh, let's lower interest rates a little bit. No harm, no foul. Yeah, right. Inflation's gonna soar.
Right.
Come roaring back, and who pays the price? It's the American people. So we just don't want that, regardless of whether it's President Trump or President Biden or whoever. We don't want politicians in the mix of monetary policy. And then maybe last point I have to make: remember, fiscal policy is just as important, if not potentially even more powerful, to get to the economic outcomes that you're after. And so Congress, the president is setting his budget. Congress in setting fiscal policy, right? The tax and spend agenda, but even the regulatory climate, all of those have an important place in explaining economic outcomes, and perhaps even more powerful. So I don't know why they're so focused on the Fed when they have so much power in their own hands, and they could actually do the right thing for Americans by just focusing on the issues and dealing with them rather than passing the buck to the next administration.
All right. So I don't disagree with that. And I'll just add one thought. I mean, it's not as if in the day and age in which we live that the seated president, and in a year like this, someone who's running for president doesn't have a pulpit from which to offer their opinions about the economy and their opinions about what the Fed should do. So, I mean, they can be heard, and the Fed can consider that to whatever degree it wants, but ultimately the Fed is accountable, right? And I think that accountability, living in one particular place, I think that's a good
I think
thing.
people can say whatever the heck they want to say, right?
I'm a big fan of that.
We do it right here on the Everyday Economics podcast. We say whatever we want to say. It's a beauty about this country, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to be responsible about the consequences of the things that we're saying, right? And I like to stick to the data. I like to stick to the evidence in front of me. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Sometimes you're wrong. But in this case, right, the last thing we want is a president of the United States basically trying to tell the Fed what to do.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate your thoughts as always.
We don't want that regardless of who's in power, right?
Loud and clear. I hear what you're saying. All right, thanks so much. For Dr. Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.